Causes of problems in supply chain management. So, what causes problems to SCM? So, the first one would be the lack of proper demand planning knowledge, tools, and guidelines. The second one is inaccurate or over optimistic demand or forecasts. And the third one would be inaccurate production, inventory, and other data. So, the lack of proper demand planning knowledge, tools, and guidelines, without these, the supply chain manager would be unable to properly predict the demand for a certain product and ways of procurement. So, if you have no knowledge of the action to be done, if there is low or high demand, then it would be difficult to make profit out of it. So, if forecasts are inaccurate or over optimistic, this might skew the amount of supply. So, most of the time, the supply would be wasted if the demand is low. So, one example for this would be for the selling of sports jerseys. So, if you create too much supply for a losing team, then turns out the supply would be wasted since there is higher demand for jerseys of winning teams. So for this, the inaccurate production inventory and other data. So if you're unable to properly predict a winning team, say for example, then most of the time you would be wasting the jerseys that you produce. So the fourth one would be lack of adequate collaboration within the company and between partners. So for this, communication is the key between partners in a supply chain. So if there is inadequate collaboration, you would most likely encounter a lot of the aforementioned problems. So the fifth problem would be SCM software considered immature, incomplete, and hard to implement. So in today's supply chains, technology has become a critical part in SEM. So we now have softwares for planning activities such as demand management, inventory management, software for tracking and optimizing inventory levels. So logistics management software and transport management systems for managing the transports of goods, especially for global supply chains and tracking. And then we also have warehouse management systems for activities related to warehouse operations. So if these softwares are not implemented properly, then you would not be able to properly manage the supply So what is electronic data interchange, or EDI? EDI is the electronic exchange of business transactions between supply chain trading partners over the internet and other networks. So examples of EDIs are purchase orders, invoices, or shipping notifications. So these documents would be kept in record. So if there is any discrepancy or miscommunication, this data can be easily pulled up to clarify any misinformation. So this would also ensure transparency between business partners. So if anyone wants to get some information, they could just easily look it up online on their database. So what are the exchanges of EDIs between partners? So one example would be from purchasers to suppliers. So usually a purchaser would send in a request for quote or quotations for the price of products that they would be procuring. So after they request for a quote, they would send in a purchase order or a payment advice. So if example, they just want to push through with the purchase. And for the supplier, they would then send a response to the purchaser. So they would reply with the initial quote for the status of the response if ever the purchaser already proceed with the purchase. So they would be sending in a shipping notice and invoice so that the purchaser would know when to expect the products. So once they receive that from the supplier, they would then send in a payment authorization. This is usually in the form of check, and they would send it over to the supplier, or they could actually do some electronic transfer of funds that we could also do now through online bankings. And also they could deposit the check directly to the supplier's bank. So this concludes our discussion for supply chain management. If you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email. We will be putting it down in the description.